Hello, Fred.
Why?
What happened in Greenville?
Well, Helene did. We very rarely get a storm that gets this far inland, but it stretched all the way up to Asheville. We lost power for a couple of days, and but then after that, my AT&T UVerse was out for 3 weeks.
Oh
I had
dear.
no landline phone, no internet, no television.
No
Well,
Really
that
TV was
weird.
the
doesn't
hardest
sound
part.
like any fun at all, and I understand it was really bad in Asheville.
Yeah, Asheville got really wiped out. I think it's the worst storm they have ever had, in their
Yeah.
history. They're
Swan-
still recovering from that.
Yeah, Swananoa specifically, really, really bad.
Where's Swananoa located?
I believe it's just east of Ash Vegas. Yeah, just just
East?
just east of there a little bit. Yeah.
Boy, because the pictures of that seem to be just gruesome.
Yeah.
Well, Fred, what about
Yeah.
you?
Well, we were lucky. We had a whole bunch of branches fall, but nothing on the house. But a
Oh,
number
that's
of
good.
people had huge trees uprooted that just fell on their roofs.
That's
So
what Paul told me his next door neighbor had exactly that. I guess the root ball was almost as high as the house. So you know
yeah,
Yeah.
what size tree it was.
yeah. It's a great time to be a tree surgeon in Greenville.
Right.
They,
I can
they've got it.
understand that.
Yeah, they've got a backlog. It'll go on for weeks and weeks to clear all this
Yeah.
Oh,
out.
months
Yeah,
and months. Yep.
yeah.
So there's not a lot of damage in Greenville. It's mostly restricted to the north, to Asheville and north.
Uh, uh, Yeah, Asheville was much worse. I mean, we most of us got our power back within a few days, and I think it hasn't been restored to Asheville completely even yet, even now.
Asheville City has most of the power. I mean, it's pretty far,
Mhm.
pretty much all the way. It's the water that's the problem
Yeah,
up
I
there.
was going to say,
Um,
Chris, what are they doing about water? Are they bringing in automated
Um,
filtration stuff?
well, I don't know. I don't live that far north. The stories I'm hearing is that they've been working 24 hours a day to put the pipes back in the ground. They're having trouble with their reservoir. It's never seen turbidity like that before, so they're trying to get that back going. So they've got water pressure to a majority of their system, but it's not potable yet. All you can do is use it for flushing and for, showers and that kind of thing. You can't consume it without
Well, it's
boiling.
not potable water then.
Right, right, exactly. So,
Well, Chris, how much
yeah.
damage did you all have?
very little actually. We got a little bit of rain, actually a bunch of rain, a little bit of wind, and that was it. We lost power for 4 or 5 days. But the solar panels and the batteries did their job. We had well and water and all that kind of stuff and could take care of all the animals, so we were good to go. Not too
Oh,
bad.
good. That's a blessing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good for
I
you.
got,
You were prepared.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I got my power back in just 2 days, but my AT&T UVerse didn't come back for 2.5 weeks. So
Which
we
Oh,
didn't have a
really?
landline phone or a television or internet.
which
But it
is
was kind of
exactly the
nice
opposite
actually.
for us. I mean, we
It's
we didn't lose internet at all. We have Starlink, so we didn't lose it.
Oh,
But yeah,
you
we
have
have a phone.
Starlink.
Uh-huh.
How does
uh,
that work?
If you've got a good unobstructed view of the sky that it needs, it works great. But if you have a couple
hmm,
trees in the way, it can affect it a little bit. But we've been using Starlink ever since we've been doing the meetings with you guys. So the last few
yeah.
years, and it
Wow.
works pretty good.
Okay, yeah. Actually, it's the first time since I was a young child before there was TV that I've gone 2.5 weeks without looking at a television set. And actually, I think
And
it's
you didn't
improved my
miss
mental
it,
health.
did
It
you?
probably has.
Did you? You
Yeah,
didn't miss it.
Didn't miss a
yeah.
thing.
I miss the internet, but not the TV. Okay.
Hmm.
Oh, it's election season. All you're
And the
gonna
news
see,
and the news is so awful that why would you want to watch?
I
right?
know. Yeah.
And all the
It
all the
was like
political ads all
therapy,
the
no
time.
news for 2.5 weeks. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I'm surprised in South Carolina that anybody is spending any money on political ads.
Well, yeah, there's only about like I said, there's only about at most a dozen states that count. And
Right.
and we're not one
Right,
of them. North Carolina is one of the states where your vote means something.
right.
But not down here. Yeah, yeah,
And we're just the reverse up here in New England.
yeah.
I'll be right back.
I think that's why a lot of people don't vote. This crazy electoral college system. Most states, it's already decided. It's not worth the trouble to bother to vote, really. Unless you live in Michigan and North Carolina or Pennsylvania or somewhere that will really decide the election. It just doesn't make sense to take the trouble to vote for a lot of people. I vote out of habit, but I know that, South Carolina is not going to go my way.
There's a lot of five actually ballot issues in Massachusetts that have generated a lot of interest. So even though normally people might not be as inclined to vote here because it's so democratic, there's been a lot of interest over the ballot issues. So I think more people will vote than might normally would because of those issues.
How many do you have, Sue?
How many ballot issues?
Yeah.
Five.
Oh, okay.
One is very controversial about whether or not the MCATs, which is the Massachusetts Achievement Test, should be required for high school graduation. And so that's generated lots of
Oh, I'll
interest.
bet.
And there's
Yeah.
a big one about tips and the minimum wage, which it's too complicated to explain, but that also has generated a lot of interest. And just so you'll know, this is what the state publishes, the Red Book, so that you will know all about all the ballot issues. So we're having a big presentation here at North Hill this weekend about the ballot issues, because really none of us are entirely sure what to do either about any of them.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunate the way many of those ballot issues are worded, if you think you're interpreting it correctly, you may be voting the wrong way, because if you vote yes, you may
Yeah.
be voting against
That's
something.
right. Yeah.
And
Well,
conversely, if you vote
have
no, it actually may mean yes.
they have a very interesting way of doing it here. Which obviously they have a setting and a summary of and then it says what your yes vote will do, what a no vote will do, and then they have a page of arguments in favor and arguments against.
Oh,
So
that's
they
good.
have
Wow,
it laid
that's
out
interesting.
very nicely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't
Okay.
remember. I think either when I lived in California or Washington State, sometimes they'd have up to 20 different ballot issues, and we got some kind of publication like that that had the pros and cons. So at least you were, you may have a ballot issue that's one paragraph, but you can't interpret what it really means, and you need to see all the back and forth to determine what it really tries to, what the implications really are.
Well, Fred, where are we in the Bible now that we've exhausted the
Okay.
politics?
Okay. Well, obviously we skipped a lot, missing a couple of Tuesdays, but actually we're coming to the end of this year's reading cycle. We're right in the middle of a holiday of Sukkot right now,
Right?
which the last day of which is Wednesday. And then Thursday is a holiday called Shemini Atzeret, which is kind of tacked onto the end of Sukkot. But that same day, that night, we celebrate Simchas Torah, rejoicing of the Torah, and we read the very last few lines of Deuteronomy, and then start the cycle, on Saturday, the next Sabbath, with Genesis again. So we really had a choice of three things, we could talk about. The three Torah readings over the rest of this week. The Shemini Atzeret reading, which is Thursday morning, is really pretty good. It covers a lot of interesting stuff. The Simchas Torah reading really isn't much. It's just the last few lines of Deuteronomy, so it's not that much to talk about. The one we'll do Saturday morning will start the new cycle, and that will be the first part of Bereshit, Genesis. The only problem is that this coming year, is the third part of a triennial cycle. So we're reading the last part, of each parsha. And typically those are the really boring parts. So, what we're going to read, on Saturday morning is just a long list of the descendants of Adam and how many years they lived. These were all the guys who were living 800 and 900 years. And it really is not very interesting. It's just a long list of guys and how long they lived. So I thought probably it'd be more interesting tonight to talk about the Shemini Atzeret reading, the one that we're going to do at the service on Thursday morning. And that's actually in the book of Deuteronomy, and it's chapter 14 in Deuteronomy. And it starts with verse 22. There are a number of interesting things that it talks about.
Tithing.
Yeah.
Deuteronomy 14, Fred?
Deuteronomy 14, and the reading starts with verse 22. Okay.
Oh, so I don't have to read about all the stuff I can't eat.
No, well, we've already skipped past that part. No. Yeah, and the first part of the reading, the first aliyah that would be read at the service is 22 through 29. So if somebody wants to read 22 through 29.
Sure. You shall tithe the entire crop of your planting, the produce of the field, year by year, and you shall eat before Hashem your God in the place that he will choose to rest his name there, the tithe of your grain, your wine, and your oil, and the firstborn of your cattle and your flocks, so that you will learn to fear Hashem your God all the days. If the road will be too long for you, so that you cannot carry it, because the place that Hashem your God will choose to place his name there is far away from you, for Hashem your God will have blessed you, then you may exchange it for money, wrap up all the money in your hand, and go to the place that Hashem your God will choose. You may spend the money for whatever your soul desires, for cattle, for flocks, for wine, or for alcoholic beverage, or anything that your soul wishes. You shall eat it there before Hashem your God and rejoice, you and your household. You shall not forsake the Levite who is in your cities, for he has no portion or inheritance with you. At the end of 3 years, you shall take out every tithe of your crop in that year and set it down within your cities. Then the Levite can come, for he has no portion or inheritance with you, and the proselyte, the orphan, and the widow who are in your cities, so they may eat and be satisfied, in order that Hashem your God will bless you in all your handiwork that you may undertake.
The tithing thing is complicated because some of the tithing, was for the poor, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, the Levite, to support them. But part of it, like it says here, you eat yourself. And there's several places in the Torah that talk about tithes, and they're all a little bit different, so it's really complicated. But I think the most significant part of that whole section, though, is not really the tithing. There's a phrase that occurs several times there, the place where he causes his name to be called. The only place you can do all this is just one place, where God has caused his name to be called, which of course is Jerusalem. And this actually occurred. That phrase must occur like 20 times in Deuteronomy. It's just over and over and over again. Some people believe that the priests had a hand in writing Deuteronomy because this actually augments their power by centralizing everything, there. But it really caused a problem because, if you were, let's say, working a farm in the Galilee, let's say north of Galilee in the tribe of Dan, which is the northernmost tribe of Israel, it would take you a couple of weeks to walk down, to Jerusalem. Most people walked in those days, or even riding a donkey. You would be lucky to get down to Jerusalem maybe a couple of times a year. And so what were you supposed to do the rest of the time? There was really no religion for you outside of that. Some people actually decided just to do it on their own, set up their own altars and offer sacrifice just on their own. And Bible refers to that as the high places. And you read periodically where various reformed kings try to get rid of the high places. But they weren't all idol worship. Some of them were people just wanting to worship God, and they couldn't get down to Jerusalem more than once or twice a year. And it's probably one of the reasons the kingdom eventually fell apart. The 10 tribes in the north, got tired of paying taxes for the upkeep of a temple that they really got to see. And, they'd finally had enough. After the death of Solomon, the country broke in half, with Judah and Benjamin in the south and the other 10 tribes in the north. And this was probably one of the major reasons for it. That whole business about only where God causes his name to be placed. Which, if you think about it, he could cause his name to be placed in a bunch of places. You don't necessarily have to read that as being only one place, but that's how it was interpreted, and that led to a lot of trouble.
This, Fred, does this presuppose that this is addressing only the landowners? Because they're the only ones that would reap the benefit of having the crops and what happens.
Mhm.
What happens if you were not
Yeah.
a landowner but Jewish, and you just all you work for subsistence? Did you how did that all work? Or it
Yeah.
just seems to me that it's tilted towards the landowner.
You're right, it is. Yeah. Mainly because probably the time that it was written, probably 90% plus of all the Hebrews were farmers. They were farmers and herdsmen. And so, it probably wasn't until later on, maybe in the time of King Solomon, that you started to get a commercial type society where you had a lot of artisans and merchants, people living in cities who weren't directly doing agriculture. Yeah, but you're right. It assumes really that almost all of the population is involved in agriculture of one kind or another.
Mhm.
Either shepherding or herding flocks, or else growing stuff.
It also seems that it's family oriented because it was the family that did that all shared in herding, or the family that all shared
Yeah,
in farming. I'm guessing, and it wasn't
yeah.
like doing 2,000 acres. It was probably 4 acres.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that was really very important. There are all kind of laws in the Torah that are meant to keep land in families. There's a law against moving your neighbor's land marker. There's a law
Mhm.
that if somebody dies and he has no son, the next closest relative has to marry his widow in order to produce a son who will inherit that land and keep the land in the family. If somebody goes bankrupt and has to sell his land, if anybody in the family is able to do so, they've got to buy that land back, to keep it in the family. Yes, it's almost like the vision that Thomas Jefferson had for America. Yeah, everybody it should be a land of family farms. So
Mhm.
Jefferson didn't like factories, didn't like cities. He thought that agriculture was the healthiest way of life. And Moses seemed to have felt the same way. And it probably wasn't till there was a monarchy, probably till King Solomon, that you started to get more of a commercial society, more like ours. And and for them, a lot of this, you're right, probably wouldn't apply unless they were asked to tithe 10% of their income,
Mhm.
non-agricultural income. Okay. The second Aliyah that we would read on Thursday is we're in chapter 15. And this is 15, really 1 through 11 is really the next major section. Somebody wants to read 1 through 11.
Sure, I'll go ahead. At the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a release. And this is the manner of the release. Every creditor shall release what he has lent to his neighbor. He shall not exact it of his neighbor, his brother, because the Lord's release has been proclaimed. Of a foreigner you may exact it, but whatever of yours is with your brother, your hand shall release. But there will be no poor among you, For the Lord will bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance to possess. If you will strictly obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all this commandment that I command you today. For the Lord your God will bless you as he has promised you, and you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow, and you shall rule over many nations, but they shall not rule over you. If among you one of your brothers should become poor, if any of your towns within your land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need. For whatever it may be, take care lest there be an unworthy thought in your heart, and you shall say, the seventh year, the year of release is near, and your eye look grudgingly on your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cry to the Lord against you, and you be guilty of sin. You shall give to him freely, and your heart shall not be grudging when you give to him, because of for this the Lord your God will bless you in all your work, in that's all of that you undertake. For there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy, and to the poor in your land.
Yeah. And notice there's kind of a there seems to be a contradiction there.
Mm-hmm.
In verse 4, he says, there will be no needy in your land, for the Lord has blessed it. That's verse 4. Then
Yeah.
ends up saying, there will not cease to be needy in your land. And actually, the interpretation of verse 4, it really depends on Hebrew grammar. In Hebrew grammar, there are only two tenses. There's what's called the perfect, which is completed action, and there's the imperfect, which is uncompleted action. And that can be read in a number of different ways. And here, when it says there will be no poor in your land, the will be, the verb to be, is in the imperfect. So it can be read, there should be no poor in your land, or there might be no poor in your land. Meaning, if ever there could be, but to be practical, at the end of the thing that says there is. And the idea of the letting go, the Hebrew term is shemitah. Every seventh year was shemitah. And so basically all loans were canceled. Now these were personal loans because they talk about your brother and the poor. So these are basically loans on which interest is prohibitive or non-interest loans, given on a personal basis to help someone who's in need. But the problem was that the later rabbis realized, particularly, like in the fifth or sixth year, who's going to lend?
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to get it back. And the rabbis were concerned with the poor because nobody's going to lend to them, if there's going to be canceled. And the problem was solved by one of the great rabbis of the first century, Hillel. And Hillel came up with his legal dodge. And in Hebrew, it's called prosbul. What it basically was, Hillel interpreted this as that all personal loans are covered by this law, but all loans by the government are not covered. And so what happens is in the seventh year, the Sanhedrin, which was the religious government, bought the loan, took over the loan for that year so that it stayed in effect. But then when the year was over, it gave the loan back, to whoever the creditor was. It was just kind of a legal dodge to get around it. It's legal. You can sell debt if you have a bond.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
sell it to somebody else. The debt is still in effect, but somebody else owns it. If they have the bonds. And so Hillel just came up with this crazy workaround, so that the poor would not be penalized by this Shemitah year, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. Why 7 years, Fred? Is that just,
Uh,
I mean, you see these
well,
numbers show up
yeah,
in the
yeah.
Torah, and they,
It's one of these significant biblical numbers. There were 7 days of creation. The Sabbath is on the seventh day. This year of Shemitah is the seventh year. The Jubilee year, you count 7 times 7, and then the next year, the 50th year, is the Jubilee year. Um, Passover is a 7 day holiday. Sukkot is a 7 day holiday. If you think about it, there are really 7 holidays. There's the Sabbath. You have the three pilgrimage festivals of Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, which makes four. You have Rosh Hashanah is five. Yom Kippur is six. And Shemini Atzeret finishes it off at seven. So, the number seven is just all over the place. And especially with Shavuot, because the rule for Shavuot is that you start on the first day of Passover, and you count 7 weeks, 7 times 7, and the next day is Shavuot. But which actually the name it originally had was the Feast of Weeks, because it doesn't give any other reason for having it. It doesn't seem to commemorate anything else. And that really bothered the rabbis, 'cause it kind of seems crazy to have just to count off 7 weeks and then have a holiday for no particular reason, except that it's 7 weeks after Passover.
yeah,
And so they decided they had to come up with some reason for it. And so they decided that that was the day that the Torah was given on Mount Sinai. And so that's what Shavuot is really celebrating. Although if you read Exodus carefully, it was over 3 months after going out of Egypt, that the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. So the math doesn't really add up anyway, but they just needed a reason, that they could make up for the holiday. Of course, later on, the church took it over and used it for their own purposes and called it Pentecost, after the Greek word for 50, because it's on the 50th day after the seven sevens. In Pentecost, when Jesus returned and met his disciples in the upper room. But yeah, seven is all over the place, though. It really for some reason, was a very, very significant number, in the
but
Bible.
there's no thoughts as to why 7.
Really,
You can
nobody really
understand
knows.
a day because that's when the sun comes up every day,
Yeah.
but then you have the 7, which we use today as 7 days in a week.
Right. Yeah. And again, it's interesting because the week really is the only unit of time we have, which is totally man-made. All the other units depend on astronomy, really, on astronomical data.
Yeah,
The year is the Earth's period of rotation around the sun. You got the month, which is the
I
moon's period of
found that
rotation around the
normally
Earth.
done by 6, but not tonight. No, I'm a little early. Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Oh, you have the day, which is the period of the Earth's rotation around its axis. And then, hours and minutes and seconds are just divisions of that day.
sure.
But the week doesn't really correlate with any kind of physical, thing like that. There's no astronomical basis for a week. It's purely a man-made thing. And for some reason, in the ancient world, seven must have had some huge significance. We don't really know why. Yeah. There was only one deviation from that, actually. There was a brief period at the time of the French Revolution, and they were trying to remake the calendar, remake everything, and the French revolutionaries were really they loved the decimal system, so they decided to have a 10-day week. Each month would be divided into three 10-day weeks, and the experiment failed. They had to give it up. People just couldn't adjust to it.
Yeah.
The week was just too strongly ingrained. But the seven, yeah, we don't know why seven, but it really was a big deal in the ancient world. So,
But when you kind of step back from what we've just read, what what what's being said is that you should always look out for your brother, which would be other Hebrew people,
mhm.
and
Yeah,
that
exactly. Yeah,
they should never be in need.
Right. And in a
however you
sense,
would define that.
yeah, in a sense, you really are giving charity when you make an interest-free
Yeah,
loan because, it costs you something to make the loan. If I lend you $1,000 per year and you pay me back the thousand at the end of the year, but let's say inflation was 3% over that year. So in effect, really, I gave you 1,000, you're giving me
yeah,
back
sure,
$970. So
yeah.
it's cost me $30 to make that interest-free
$30
loan. Yeah.
to
Well,
die.
that's what banks do
Yeah,
when they
sure.
calculate the interest they're going to charge you. It's the rate of inflation they predict over that term, plus whatever their profit is going to be on top of that. So an interest-free loan really, in a sense, is a form of charity. And the rabbis like Hillel, they separated personal loans like that from business loans. Business loans don't come under this kind of law. This is only when you're lending to your brother, a personal loan.
And was that generally thought of then to be family? When it says brother, it's really family.
No, brother means any other Israelite. All Israelites are brothers in that sense.
Yeah,
So
okay.
any personal loan to help someone out, that's lending to your brother and it's interest free. And it comes under the 7 year, kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
But any kind of business loan, any kind of commercial type loan, that
That's
that has
outside.
nothing to do with this. That's interest and that's a regular loan. And then the next section that's read is verses 12 through 18 in chapter 15. How to treat a Hebrew servant. Someone wants to read that.
I'll
Hmm.
go ahead and read again.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
no. Okay.
If your brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you, he shall serve you 6 years, and in the 7th year you shall let him go free from you. And when you let him go free from you, you shall not let him go empty-handed. You shall furnish him liberally out of your flock, out of your threshing floor, and out of your winepress. As the Lord your God has blessed you, you shall give to him. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. Therefore I command you this today. But if he says to you, I will not go out from you, because he loves you and your household, since he is well off with you, then you shall take an awl and put it through his ear into the door, and he shall be your slave forever. And to your female slave you shall do the same. It shall not seem hard to you when you let him go free from you, for at half the cost of a hired worker he shall serve you 6 years. So the Lord your God will bless you in all that you do.
Yeah. Basically, this is how you treat a Hebrew servant. Some people translate it as a Hebrew slave, and there aren't separate words for it in Hebrew. There's only one word, eved, which means someone who serves, and is used for servant or slave. But when it says he's sold to you, what it means is he's selling himself. Basically, if you get over your head in debt, uh, and there's no way out. The only alternative you would really have either sell your land, which the Torah tries to make every effort not to have people do, or you can sell yourself. It's really what we would call indentured servitude. You serve 6 years and you work off your debt,
Mhm.
and then you can go back, to your own land. In fact, it doesn't say it over here, but this is a repeat of a law from Exodus. And in Exodus, it's a little bit more elaborate. It says you actually have to give him severance pay. You have to furnish him from your vineyard and your fields and your own store, to help him get on his feet, and start his life again back in his land. But if he decides he doesn't want to go, You know, besides, I could just soon stay and be a servant for life. You know, which the Torah discourages. I mean, and obviously that he's abandoning his land. Nobody knows what's going to happen to it, and basically, you don't really want someone like him who doesn't want to be free. And so, you know, the idea. I'm not sure how they got this thing about puncturing your ear with an awl. It's but
In the
again,
door.
yeah, there are a bunch of different rabbinic interpretations of that. One is, I think, from Rashi, and Rashi says, well, because the ear was chosen, because it was the ear that heard God's commandments at Sinai, and you're not keeping God's commandments if you choose to be a slave rather than choose to be free. So that's Rashi's explanation of it. But you know, it's not really like you're really branding him or anything, but it's enough that it might maybe discourage people from choosing a life of servitude rather than going back and trying to make it again on their own.
Is that
Because
what happened when the Hebrews were in Egypt, that they sold themselves to the king and that's how they became slaves?
that's how Joseph enslaved the Egyptians. Yeah, you know, all that grain that was piled up during the 7 good years, when the 7 famine years came, he sold it back to them. I mean, and this is grain they had produced. He sold their own grain back to them, and when they ran out of money to buy it, then he took their animals. And when they ran out of animals, then they, you know, lasted for 7 years. He took their land, and when they no longer had any land, they had to sell themselves to Pharaoh as slaves. Yeah.
Okay.
Whereas here it's a lifetime, you know, type of thing. Here the Bible limits it, although this again only applies to Hebrew slaves. There is a law elsewhere, I think, and again in Exodus, you know, if it's a foreigner, you know, or somebody you capture in war from another people, you can keep them as slaves, you know, for a lifetime, and your kids can inherit them. And you know, this is more like slavery. Yeah, the other reason some of the rabbis said maybe that somebody would not want to leave after the 6 years, you know, after all, the reason that you had to sell yourself in the first place is that you tried to make a go of farming and couldn't do it. I mean, you know, you had failed. You know, you were over your head in debt. You couldn't make a go of farming. And so, you know, maybe you think it's better off to live in someone else's house. At least you get 3 meals a day and a place to sleep, and there's
Mhm.
more security than going out and trying to farm the land again when you'd already failed once. So that would be another reason for, you know, for wanting to stay with your master. Okay. Then the third subject that comes up, which would be the third aliyah that's read, is a short one. It's just verses 19 through 23. Someone wants to read that.
Sure. Every firstborn that is born in your herd or in your flock, the male you shall consecrate to the Lord your God. You shall not work the firstborn of your oxen, nor shall you shear the firstborn of your flock. But for the Lord you shall eat it, year after year, in the place that the Lord chooses, you and your household. And should there be a defect in it, lameness or blindness or any bad defect, you shall not sacrifice it to the Lord your God. Within your gates you may eat it, the unclean and the clean together, like the gazelle and like the deer. Only its blood you shall not eat. On the ground you shall spill it like water.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here, but basically the main point they're making is the importance of the male firstborn. You know, not only of animals but people also. And it seems to have been kind of a folk superstition, really, that a man only had so much vitality, and really in his sperm. And so, you know, with each succeeding child, there's a little bit less. And so the firstborn really got the best deal. Of course, the firstborn male. You know, the Bible doesn't talk about firstborn daughters. You know, you don't see that in the Bible. But the odd thing is, you know, uh, even though the Bible makes a big deal about the firstborn son over and over again, if you actually look at how it works out, in practice, that almost never happens. You know, Abraham's firstborn is Ishmael. Isaac, you know, gets the birthright. Isaac's firstborn is Esau. Jacob gets the birthright. Jacob's firstborn is Reuben. You know, the fourth son of Leah, Judah, really gets the leadership in Israel. Um, David is the youngest of 7 sons.
Mhm.
Solomon, I think, is either David's fourth or fifth son. And so even though, the Bible carries on all the time about the importance of the firstborn son, in actual practice, the firstborn son really rarely is the one who carries on the line. It's really kind of weird, the way he does that. Um, and let's see, 23. Yeah, that was here. Um, And then again, it comes back to that theme about the place where the Lord causes his name to be called. They always come back to that. Any kind of religious activity can only be done there. Only if it's an unclean animal that's not fit for sacrifice can you eat that, in the gates of your own city. And then, of course, the thing about pouring the blood out in the ground, that's the commandment that goes back to Noah. When God says, okay, if you have to eat meat, let you eat meat. It's a concession to human weakness. If you have to eat meat, eat it, but don't drink the blood. Yeah, and that's where this whole business, there's a whole ritual of salting and soaking meat, to remove all possible blood. That's part of the kosher way of preparing meat. So. Okay. Then the rest of it, the rest of the reading really is a reprise of the rules for the three what they call pilgrimage holidays. That was Pesach, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, and those were the times when everybody, at least all the men, were supposed to go down to Jerusalem, to celebrate the holiday. Um, and the first one actually it starts off by talking about Passover. And that really gets us into chapter 16. And that goes really from 16:1 through 8. If somebody wants to read those verses.
Okay. You shall observe the month of springtime and perform the Pesach offering for Hashem your God, for in the month of springtime Hashem your God took you out of Egypt at night. You shall slaughter the Pesach offering to Hashem your God from the flock, and also offer cattle in the place where Hashem will choose to rest his name. You shall not eat leavened bread with it. For 7 days you shall eat matzos because of it, bread of affliction, for you departed from the land of Egypt in haste, so that you will remember the day of your departure from the land of Egypt all the days of your life. No leaven of yours shall be seen throughout your boundary for 7 days, nor shall any of the flesh that you slaughter on the afternoon before the first day remain overnight until morning. You may not slaughter the Pesach offering in one of your cities, that Hashem your God gives you, except at the place that Hashem your God will choose to rest his name. There shall you slaughter the Pesach offering in the afternoon, when the sun descends, the appointed time of your departure from Egypt. You shall roast it and eat it in the place that Hashem your God will choose, and in the morning you may turn back and go to your tents. For a 6-day period you shall eat matzahs, and on the 7th day shall be an assembly for Hashem your God. You shall not perform labor.
Yeah, and this basically is just a reprise of Exodus. There's nothing new here. It's just repeating the laws that are previously given during Exodus. And again, they have the place where God chooses to have his name known. They get that into everything there. Um,
Fred, I hate to interrupt you, but I have
yeah.
company for dinner. May I be
Oh,
May
you're
I be
excused. Yes.
Thank you.
Goodbye,
Hi,
Sue.
Sue.
Have a good dinner.
Bye, Sue. Okay. Yeah. The other thing about Passover is it's in the month of spring, which of course is the month of Nisan in the calendar we use now. It's also the barley harvest. All those three festivals, the pilgrimage festivals, were really based on ancient Canaanite harvest festivals. The Hebrews just took them over and repurposed them. A Passover actually is the barley harvest. And the rule was then that after it was harvested, for the next 7 weeks until Shavuot, you brought an omer, a measure of barley, to the temple every day as an offering. And today in synagogues, in commemoration of that, we count the omer. It's done on the days between Passover and Shavuot. That really begins it. And then they go into the next holiday, which is Shavuot. That's 9 through 12. Somebody wants to read that.
I can keep going, or
Yeah.
You shall count 7 weeks for yourselves. For when the sickle is first put to the standing crop, shall you begin counting 7 weeks. Then you shall observe the festival of Shavuos for Hashem your God. The voluntary offerings that you give should be commensurate with how much Hashem your God will have blessed you. You shall rejoice before Hashem your God, you, your son, your daughter, your slave, your maidservant, the Levite who is in your cities, the proselyte, the orphan, and the widow who are among you, in the place that Hashem your God will choose to rest his name. You shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and you shall observe and perform these decrees.
Yeah. So basically, again, just counting the 7 weeks. And again, it gives no reason for the holiday. And so this is why the rabbis made up the thing about, the Torah being given on Shavuot. There's an interesting thing, though. There is a theory. If you look at what the Torah says about Rosh Hashanah, and Rosh Hashanah, by the way, the name is not in the Torah. All the Torah says about Rosh Hashanah is on the first day of the seventh month, shall be a Mikra Kodesh, a holy occasion. You shall do no work. And the only reason they give it, it's a Yom Teruah, a day of shofar blowing, and a Yom Hazikaron, and the day of remembrance. But it doesn't say what you're supposed to be remembering. But those are the only two things. There's nothing in there about being at the new year or anything like that. That's rabbinic convention from later on. But when you think about it, when is the first time that we heard the shofar blown in the Torah? It was at Mount Sinai. If you read the description, Moses goes up in the mountain and the sound of the shofar getting louder and louder and the smoke and fire in the mountain. So one theory is that's really when we should be celebrating the Torah being given on the first day of the seventh month. We should remember the sound of the shofar that we heard at Sinai. But that was already taken by Shavuot, so they, you know, the rabbis had a lot of latitude about what they did with this stuff. Okay. And then the third of the three holidays, of course, is Sukkot, and that's from 13 through 17. Someone wants to read that.
Okay, you shall keep the feast of booths 7 days when you have gathered in the produce from your threshing floor and your wine press. You shall rejoice in your feast, you and your son and your daughter, your male servant and your female servant, the Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow who are within your towns. For 7 days you shall keep the feast to the Lord your God at the place that the Lord will choose, because the Lord your God will bless you in all your produce and in all the work of your hands, so that you will be altogether joyful. 3 times a year all your males shall appear before the Lord your God at the place that he will choose, at the festival of the unleavened bread, at the feast of weeks, and at the feast of booths. They shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God that he has given you.
Yeah, so that kind of sums it up. Although you really have to wonder, as a practical matter, whether everybody could really do that. I mean, if you lived around Jerusalem, that was fine. You could go to the temple as often as you wanted to. But again, let's say you're up in the north of Israel, you're working a farm in the Galilee. It's a 2-week trip to get down to Jerusalem. So let's say you want to go there for Passover. You get there, you spend, Passover is a 7-day holiday. You spend a week in Jerusalem celebrating Passover. It takes you 2 weeks to get back home after that. But then you're only 4 weeks away from Shavuot.
Yeah.
You've only got 2 weeks to be at home, and then you got to hit the road again to get back in time for Shavuot. And you really wonder how many people are actually going to do that as a practical matter. It would probably be more practical to do Passover in the spring and Sukkot in the fall, or Shavuot in the spring and again Sukkot in the fall. you really wonder if people living at a distance from Jerusalem could actually get down there 3 times a year. And that was probably another source of real discontent. But the
Well, and
other
this,
thing was, you remember the very first part we read, they said if the way is too long for you, if you can't bring your sacrificial animals with you, it's hard enough to walk down there without driving animals along
sure.
with you. Sell them there, take the money, and then buy, an animal when you get down there. And of course, this was going to be a seller's market. I mean, if you made this huge trip to Jerusalem, you can't leave without offering a sacrifice. And basically you got pilgrims coming from all over the place, to Jerusalem these 3 times a year. And if you're a cattle breeder or a shepherd or if you own an inn in Jerusalem, this is a bonanza. It's a seller's market. And these people probably got ripped off, each time they went down there. It was just kind of an invitation for corruption, in that whole system there.
Well, and it wouldn't be just one individual in a family if you had 7 or 8 kids.
Exactly. Although as
Everybody
they said,
goes.
it said that all your males, the requirement doesn't mean your family can't go, but the requirement is for only the males. In
But
fact, it's
who's
the
going to
only
cook?
right.
They don't have
Yeah.
MRAs they can take with them.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah,
lot
it's
of.
interesting. This is the only commandment in the Torah. I guess maybe circumcision is the exception, but this is the only commandment in the Torah that specifically only applies to males. They specifically say all your males.
Yeah.
Um, it,
That's
it,
why
it,
I said, who's going to cook?
yeah. Yeah, and then later on, in Second Temple times, during the Roman era, by that time a lot of Jews were living in diaspora, all over the Roman Empire, and would make the pilgrimage, and they were bringing other currencies with them. So that had to be. Then you had the money changers setting up shop around the temple because you had to change your foreign currency, to buy animals for sacrifice there. That's what got Jesus so upset. In the New Testament, where he kicks over the benches of the money changers. It was just a recipe for corruption, really, to
Mhm,
to
mhm.
centralize the religion that way in one place like that. It was bound to get people in trouble.
Yeah.
And then again, this is the reading that we're going to do Thursday morning for the Shemini Atzeret thing. So, any questions or comments about what we covered?
No, it's good to be back
Okay.
again, Fred.
Good
It
to see
is.
everybody.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although actually, though, I'm limiting my television watching. I felt so good the 2.5 weeks. I didn't have any
Good.
television.
One
I'm
hour a
trying to
day.
keep that up. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The internet is great, but I'm trying to wean off television.
You can watch one news program and that's it.
Right.
Choose wisely.
Okay. Great. Okay. See you guys next week.
See y'all.
Okay, very
Okay.
good. Thank you,
Bye.
Fred. Chris,
Okay.
Rachel, have a good
Hey,
week.
John. You
Yeah.
too.